Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar. During today's session, you're able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers, along with the recording of this live session, will be posted to our YouTube channel a week from today's presentation. This month's topic will be on archiving best practices and troubleshooting, and Devita will take us through this content. I'll turn it over to Devita now.
Thank you, Greg. I'm Devita Mujoo, Technical Support Analyst with BMC Software, working in Remedy Server team. My topic for today's webinar is Archiving Best Practices and Troubleshooting Some Common Issues. Here is the agenda for today's webinar. We'll see the overview of archiving, multi-threaded archiving, configuration of archiving, troubleshooting some common issues, the demo, and few of the references. Let's see the overview. So archiving, as we all know, is a process to remove unwanted data. So what does archiving do in Remedy? Archiving as well will remove obsolete records from production dataset. The archive process runs in controlled and predictable manner. Archive operation will move qualifying transactional data from main form to corresponding archive form. Archive operation is low resource and not critical, so expected to run continuously in order to keep up with the queue. First time archiving will take longer time depending on the data, hence recommended to run during off-business hours. Make sure we give certain qualification for archiving. Otherwise, all data in the form will be archived, and then we can imagine the effect on performance. So specify the qualification. Then you can also export and delete archived data directly from the application. Let's see how to identify which data to archive. Suppose the application is used for over 5 years and the data gets accumulated for this much period of time in the main forms. So depending on the organizational data retention policy, you may need to archive the data. So there will be data which is relevant and live. For example, the open incidents. So you do not remove this data. Then there will be data which is relevant but rarely accessed. For example, recently closed incidents which are required for reporting. So this data should also be maintained. Then finally, there will be data which is outdated. This should be archived. For example, the closed incidents that do not need to be searchable by end users, and also inbound or outbound email message records which are already processed. So this way you can decide which data to archive. Then archiving automates these processes by setting up rules for offloading and purging data. Here are the benefits of archiving. Archiving will reduce the size of production dataset by removing data from main forms. Also, this is one of the ways to improve system performance. For example, searches will run more quickly because they will look only at the production data and not at the archive data. And also it will comply with the organizational data retention policy. So the next is archiving feature is supported for regular and view forms only. This is not supported for vendor forms, join forms, or display only forms. Archive forms are auto-generated. That is, as soon as archiving is enabled, server creates the archive forms internally and sets the form type as archive. We do not have to create the archive form separately. Schema_archive is the meta table of archive where definition is primarily stored. So it will store bidirectional references to main form and archive form. Bidirectional references means the reference to the archive form is stored corresponding to main form schema ID, and the reference to main form is stored corresponding to archive form schema ID. So if we perform a search for main form in database, we will also find the reference of corresponding archive form along with the main form, and vice versa. We will get into more details of bidirectional reference during the demo. The next is architecture. This is the architecture of archiving process. So this is, for example, given for the incident management application. The incidents which are older than 548 days are archived and moved to corresponding archive form. Also, the records from associated forms are archived. The next is multi-threaded archiving. Archiving was always a single-threaded operation till Remedy 1808. From Remedy 1902 onwards, archiving has become multi-threaded operation. Multi-threaded does not mean it will run archival for multiple forms in parallel. However, it means that it will run archival for multiple entries in a given form at a time. That is, each record and all of its associated records are archived before moving on to the next record from a form. So, for example, if an incident record is archived, then it will archive records from its associated forms sequentially and then move to the next incident record. The new parameter configured for multi-threaded archiving is num archive threads. This is configured using centralized configuration. Default value set for this parameter is 4. So when 4 threads are configured, which means that there will be 4 threads in thread pool, and those 4 threads will run on 4 different transactions in parallel. These threads are also called archive worker threads. Configuring more threads will lead to faster archival or increase the throughput of archive operation. This is the screenshot of how multi-threaded archiving is configured. Here are the best practice configuration for archival. The basic configuration is archive operation should be ranked 1 in one of the backend or admin server in the server group in AR system server group operation ranking form. Otherwise, archiving will not happen. The next is disable archive global parameter should be set to false, or choose not to set this parameter. This parameter is configured from centralized configuration, and if it is set to true, then archive will not work as it will be disabled globally. The next is operating mode should be set to 0. If it is set to any higher value apart from 0, then server considers it in upgrade mode and archive operation will be disabled. The next is Archive Manager Console. AR System Archive Manager Console is the display-only form. The backend form from where it retrieves the data is the AR System Archive Policy form, which is the regular form. Whichever policies we have configured for archival using Developer Studio, that is by checking the checkbox, include in archive policy, all those policies will be listed in this console. We can control the settings of continuous as well as manual archiving from this console. We will get into more details of Archive Manager Console during the demo. This is the screenshot of how the backend form looks, that is AR System Archive Policy form. Now let's watch the demo. So let's watch the demo. So let's first look at the configuration. As I mentioned in the presentation, first we should configure the archive operation in the ranking form. So this is the AR System Server Group Operation Ranking form. So I will select the operation archive. And see if it is ranked 1. So I can see it is rank 1 in one of the server. The next thing to check is I will go to AR System Administration Console, System, General, Centralized Configuration, and search for the component com.bmc.arsys.server.shared. And here I see the parameter disable archive global set to false. So I may choose not to set this parameter also. And the next parameter is num archive threads, which is used for multi-threaded archiving. So the another thing to check over here is for the component com.bmc.arsys that the operating mode should be set to 0. So it is set to 0 here. So let's see how the bidirectional references work. So I have queried the schema underscore archive table for the schema tms:/task. The schema ID for that form is 1528. So when I execute this query, I see it gives below results. The column with archive to form will show the archive form of TMS task form, and the column with archive from form will show 0 because we have queried the schema of the archived from form. So similar way, if I query the form or the archive form of TMS task which has the schema ID of 1651, so if I run the query on 1651, it will return the results as below. It will show the archive to from column is 0, and it will show archive from form as 1528, which is the main form schema ID. So this is how it will show the bidirectional references of the archive schema as well as the main schema form. So as we seen in the presentation, now let's see in the demo how we can enable the archiving for the forms using the Developer Studio. This is done only first time from the Developer Studio. Then we can control this policies from the Archive Manager console. So we have to log into the Developer Studio, go to the forms, and for example now I have taken the AR system email attachments form. So here I see there is a corresponding archive form already exists in the system. So when I open this form and go to the definitions, go to other definitions in the archive section. Here I see the archive policy is not enabled. So in order to enable this policy, I have to change the overlay type to overwrite, save the changes, and I see here I can enable, I see here the archiving is enabled. So in the archive type we have three options. The first one is none. If you set this, that means archiving is not happening. The second one is delete from source. This option will directly delete the data from the main form. And the third one is this will copy to archive and delete from source. So this will copy the data from the main forms to the corresponding archive form and delete it from the source. So when I select this one and the archive status enabled, the archive form is already the AR system email attachments archive. Then I check this checkbox, include in archive policy, and save the changes so then the archive policy is enabled for this form. So what are these two options? No attachments and no diary fields. So if I select these two options, that means the data in the attachment and the diary field will be deleted from the main form and will not be copied to the archive form. So prefer not to select these two options. So now I save these changes and the archiving is enabled for this form. Now let's see how we can enable archive on a custom form. So I create a test form here. custom form. So this is the form. So I do not see here the underscore archive form. So I'll open this form. Go to the definition and the archive section and select here, there is the archive type as none. So I select here the copy to archive, enable the archive state and give the name archive form, include an archive policy, and this is done. The archiving on the custom form is enabled this way. However, it is important to note one thing here is we do not archive the system forms such as user, group form, server statistics, and server events by using copy to archive and delete from source, because these forms use reserved fields that should exist only on one form in Remedy AR system. Now let's see the Archive Manager console. So let's go into the details of Archive Manager console now. So in order to go to the Archive Manager console, we have to go to AR System Administration, then AR System Archive Manager console. So from this console, we can control the settings of all the policies. So at the top left, we have the System Archive setting. So this will, from here, we can enable or disable the continuous archiving. So if I uncheck this checkbox and click apply, that means the continuous archiving for all the policies will be disabled. So I enable this policies again, and then this run every hour interval is the interval which is specified to run all the policies globally, is the interval set for all the policies to run incremental or continuous archiving. The default time interval is 24 hours. So every after 24 hours, the archive policies will run, and these are run at midnight. So the next is the archive policies. So whichever policies we have enabled from Developer Studio using the include in archive policy, so those policies will be listed here. So I have few of the policies. So the default age for the policies given is 548 days for most of the policies, but few of the policies like knowledge management and some of CMDB policies have the default age as 90 days. So we can customize this age in days depending on the requirement. So if I want to customize this age, I will just give the age in days field whichever day, like suppose I want the records which are older than 348 days to be archived. So I will specify the age in this field and click apply. Then and this is specific to a particular policy. This is not to all the policies. So I will just select this for one of the enabled policy, and I will modify the age of the records as 500 days, and this will customize the age in days. However, if suppose I want to disable this policy for some reason, so I will disable it, but I will not be able to provide the custom age in days will not be the same. This value will be reset. So suppose if I disable this policy and I see here the -1 value in the custom specified age in days column, so that means this policy is disabled. So if I again after some time want to enable this policy, I will click enable policy, but the earlier customized age I had given is that value is gone. So if I want to set it again, I will have to set it to that same value again. So it will not be retained. The next thing is, whichever policies are disabled, we will see the -1 value in this custom specified age in days column. Then to enable this policy, we just have to select the policy and click this Enable Policy button. The next is, if I want to run a particular policy on demand, suppose this change management policy I want to run on demand. So I will select that policy and click this Run Selected Policy now to run that policy on demand. So here I'll get a message on top left that change management archive policy has run successfully. So if I enable the logging for archive logging, I will see that on demand policy is running for the archive for the change form. So the option we have here for system archive setting for enabling and disabling archival for continuous policies, this is the global setting. Similarly, we have the setting for system archive export. This is also the global setting. This is applicable to all the policies which are set for archival. So over a period of time, the data in the archived forms get accumulated, and you may need to delete that data from the archive forms too. So we have the option here to remove that data. So there are 3 options here. The first one is export and delete. So this will export the data from the archive forms, and you can maintain a local copy of this data in the CSV format and delete the data from the archive forms. So the production system will not hold this data. Then the next option is export. So this option will export the data in the CSV format in the local, or you can maintain a local copy, as well as the data will be still there in the archive forms. And the third option is delete. So in this option, it will directly delete the data from the archive forms. You will not keep a backup of the local copy of this data. So here, if suppose I want to select the export and delete, so I will give the age in days, like I want to delete the data which is older than 540 days. So it will find the data from all the archive policies which is older than 540 days, and it will delete the data from the production system from the archive forms. And then once I give the age in days, I select export. So I get this notification that export has done successfully. So if I check in the DB directory of the primary archive server, I find this data in the CSV format. So I can maintain the old data if required. So this was it about the Archive Manager console. So this is the link to the documentation related to troubleshooting of archive process. Moving on, so here I have listed few of the troubleshooting issues related to archival. To start with, the first one is archiving doesn't run even after the policy is added or even when the archival is run on demand. One of the reasons behind this was archive operation was not ranked in the AR system server group operation ranking form. In order to resolve this problem, we have to go to the AR system server group operation ranking form, rank 1 for the archive operation in one of the backend or admin server, save the changes, then do refresh ranking for the changes to reflect. The next is unable to create out-of-the-box archive form. As I mentioned earlier, out-of-the-box archive forms already exist and you do not have to create it separately. If you are unable to find the archive form, switch to the base mode from the Developer Studio and search for the particular archive form. The next is archive data corruption. On the archive form, the submit date for all the records is showing as the archive date and not the actual submit date. So this behavior is as designed. The submit date for the archive records represents the date when the archive will happen and not the actual create date. However, the original request ID and the create date of archive records is still there and is copied to the different field ID on the archive form, and they are preserved in the archive form. The next is HPD helpdesk records are being archived, but the records from associated forms were not being archived. One of the reasons behind this was there was no data available in the associated forms to archive, which was matching the qualification. The next is archive operation was running very slow. One of the reasons was the index was not available on the field where the respective form was archived. In order to analyze this issue, we'll have to capture the API SQL and the archive logs, analyze the logs for the query taking longer time to archive, and find the field and the form on which it's taking long time, then create the index on that field. We can do this from the Developer Studio or directly from the database. So, if at all you run into any issues related to archival and want to contact BMC support, we need to get following details. Enable the archive and the API and SQL logs, reproduce the issue, then document the steps along with the date, time, the error you are getting, and the form name, and zip the logs, the API SQL AR archive and the AR error logs, and share with BMC support. So logging. So here we have two types of logging captured for archival. One is continuous archiving. This will log details about policies which will run automatically based upon designated frequency. And the second one is manual archiving, which will log details about policies which are run on demand. However, in both the cases, we have to enable these logs explicitly. Archive logs are not enabled by default. So in order to enable the logs, you have to go to AR System Administration Console, System, General, Server Information, Log Files tab, and enable the AR archive logs. This is the snapshot of how the archive log looks in 9104 environment. So here it will show that the continuous archiving is happening, which form is being archived, how many records it has archived, and also the associated form details. So next I have the screenshot from the 1902 environment where multi-threaded archiving has been enabled. Only difference we'll see here is how many threads it is using for archival. These are few of the references to the documentation related to archival. So let's summarize what we learned in the webinar. So we learned today the importance of archiving or the overview of archiving, how to configure or the best practices configuration for archival. The major one is the multi-threaded archiving feature, which is introduced since 1902 onwards. Then few of the troubleshooting common issues, then how to efficiently work with support. This concludes my presentation. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Devita. And now I'll take us through the closing, the self-help and contacting BMC, our YouTube channel where this webinar and other webinars are placed, along with many how-to videos to help you work with the product, along with the community schedule for the webinar series, and the hot off the press newsletter that has a lot of trending information and links to past webinars as well. To contact support via web, phone, and email, as well as these social channels. That concludes our session. Thank you.